So today we're going to talk about jhanas. Jhana comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana. So dhyana means to focus, it means to meditate. But here in the Pali Canon, the context of jhanas is that they are levels of meditation. So the other day we were talking about the Eightfold Path, and that includes right collectedness. And within right collectedness are the four jhanas. So you will see in the Pali Canon they talk about 8 jhanas, 8 levels of meditation. But actually there are 4, and then there are 4 ayatanas. I'll get into that as we discuss it. So what do we mean when we say jhanas? Bhante Varamsi called them levels of understanding. Because as you progress through each level, you have a different understanding of reality. I call them levels of cessation, because as you experience each jhana, the coarser experiences in the outside world and in the mental field starts to become reduced, and you get into a more subtle state of mind. So what is the first jhana? The first jhana is, each jhana has its own, let's say, composites, its own components that make up that particular state. The first jhana is basically, it says, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, he enters into the first jhana, which is made up of thinking and examining thought, accompanied by joy and comfort. So let's break that down. What does that mean? When you are sitting down for meditation and you use an object like loving kindness, or you look at the good things in your life and you reflect on the goodness in your life, immediately your mind becomes uplifted. There is a sense of happiness, a sense of joy, a sense of elation that comes up. This is the beginning of the first jhana. And why is that? First, it says you're quite secluded from sensual pleasures. When you close your eyes and sit down for meditation, your attention is directed inward. It is not outward. It is not looking at things around you. You're not paying attention to the people around you. It is internalized on an object of meditation. So that is the thinking. That is the secluded from sensual pleasures. Because your eyes are closed, your attention to the ears, what's happening with the other physical sense bases, is now withdrawn. And it's only in the mental. So, secluded from unwholesome states. What are unwholesome states? The hindrances, distractions. This is why in my book, A Mind Without Craving, I've talked about jhana as void of hindrances and filled with the enlightenment factors or the awakening factors. So you need the awakening factors in order for the mind to be in jhana. There is a sutta called the Finger Snap Sutta. And it says in that, the Buddha says, if one were to have enough loving kindness to span the length of a finger snap, immediate, that mind is not void of jhana. So when you are cultivating loving kindness, and he says, how much more so for one who cultivates loving kindness? So when you have loving kindness, your mind is getting jhanic. Your mind is starting to get collected. It might not happen immediately. It might take some time because the mind is so used to different external stimulation that when it becomes internalized, all of these thoughts are there in the process. But as you start to relax and let go, so first you are relaxing the body using the body scan. So now you're secluding your mind from sensual pleasures or sensual experiences in general. And then you notice hindrances and you let them go. As a result of letting go of the hindrances, your mind experiences pamoja, the relief. And that relief then gives rise to joy. But how is this cultivated? Through thinking and examining thought. The thinking, the vitaka or vitarka, is the intentionalizing of a thought. So when you intentionalize, verbalize, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be free of suffering, may I be filled with loving kindness. When you think of an image or a memory, a wholesome memory, or you use gratitude, or you think back to things that you've done in your life that uplift you, that is the vitarka. That is putting the key into the ignition and turning it on, starting it. That's the intentionalizing, the thinking. And the examining thought is the intention to sustain that attention on the object of meditation. As a result of which, some level of joy comes in. This is known as piti in Pali. This joy is mental in nature. It doesn't matter if it manifests physically in terms of heat or warmth or vibration, but there is a emotive quality, there's an emotional quality to it, where you're actually experiencing uplifted states. Sometimes it's translated as exuberance. That might be a bit too much, because if I call it exuberance, then you're going to expect fireworks all the time in your mind. We don't want that. We just want a very uplifted state that is not dependent upon sensual experiences. This is very important to understand. So the piti that we're talking about is mental joy. It's not joy based on physical sensations. It's a joy cultivated through thinking and examining, through meditating, through bringing up an object, through letting go, through the relief that you feel when you let go of a hindrance. And there's something called sukha. Sukha, as I was saying the other day, is comfort. It's where the body is stable and there's relaxation and tranquility in the body and the mind feels at ease. So this is the first jhana. Now this can last for anywhere from a few seconds to a minute to 5 minutes to where you keep coming in and out. What do I mean by keep coming in and out? Remember, there will be always background thoughts in any of the jhanas. Doesn't matter. When we talk about thinking and examining thought, we're talking about an intentional process of thinking and an intentional process of bringing up an object. When we get caught up in the thoughts, that is the distraction. When you are distracted, you are no longer in jhana. So you can come in and out based on whether there is a distraction or not. When your mind is free of that distraction for some time, whether it's 10 seconds, whether it's 20 seconds, whether it's a minute, whether it's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, in that time, the mind is uplifted and it experiences these factors of the jhana. Another factor of the jhana is something known as ekagata or ekagrata. The full thing is chitta ekagrata or ekagra chitta. There has been a lot of controversy and debate and conflict in the Buddhist world, which I have no interest in getting into, about what this word ekagrata actually means, because some people say it's one-pointed, some people say it means it's absorbed, some people say it means that the mind is unified, and one-pointedness is bad, and absorption is bad, and you have to be aware in the jhana, and all of these things. You know, Twim says one thing, the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition says another thing, the Pao Ox Sayadaw tradition says another thing. Like everybody has their own idea of that. I have no skin in the game. I don't really care whether you want to have easy jhanas, light jhanas, hard jhanas. You want to be in jhana, you don't want to be in jhana, it's up to you. Doesn't matter to me. So just understand the ekagrata chitta. What is it saying? A unified mind, a mind that is composed, a mind that is collected. Its attention is non-dispersed. Its attention is orbiting the object of meditation. So when you have a unified mind, you're getting into the first jhana. After a while, the verbalizing stops. The continuous image making stops. The process of gratitude or whatever else you've used to bring up the loving kindness or any of the objects that you are using stops. Which means there is the cessation of thinking and examining thought. The cessation of vitakka and vichara. And what remains is the mind has self-confidence. It has joy, it has comfort or piti and sukha, and it has ekagrata. What is that self-confidence that we're talking about? What it's saying is there is a certain ease that's happening, a flow that's happening. It's like the mind is now on autopilot. You don't have to keep bringing up the loving kindness. You don't have to keep engaging with it. You can trust that it continues. You can trust that the mind rests in equanimity. You can trust that the mind rests in the quiet mind. So in this second jhana, that self-confidence, that autopilot is there. Like, this is actually working. I can actually feel it happening. And now I don't need further intentionalizing. Background thoughts will still be there, and that's not a big deal. But what is remaining is the joy and the comfort, the joy and tranquility. This is the main factors of the second jhana. In the third jhana, what ceases is the piti, the joy. So now we're getting into levels of cessation. In the first jhana, what ceases are the unwholesome states. Yeah, thank you. So in the first jhana, what ceases are those unwholesome states, those hindrances. And what also ceases are the sensual experiences. You'll still hear things, you'll still hear the fan, you'll still hear the birds chirping, you'll still hear people coming in and out of the hall and so on and so forth. But your mind is collected. So what has ceased specifically are the hindrances. In the second jhana, what has ceased is the intentionalizing, the verbalizing, the bringing up of the feeling of loving kindness or the object in general, and the sustained attention, because now it's on autopilot. In the third jhana, what ceases is piti, joy. So oftentimes what will happen is a person is meditating and they're like, I felt so much joy, or I felt very uplifted, and then it felt like as if it went flat, or like I kind of lost control and I couldn't feel the joy anymore. And people are disheartened by that. They think I'm going in the wrong direction, something's going on. No. I've said this before, bliss is overrated. Bliss is short-lived. If you're living for bliss, then I feel sorry for you. Because bliss is just an aspect of life. Beyond bliss is something even greater. And that is the sukha. That is the tranquility, the comfort that comes. This is the difference between the bliss or the joy and the comfort. You think about a candle flame. The candle flame, if it's under the fan, will flicker. That's joy. It's excitable. It's got all of this activity in it. It's just a bit too short-lived, unsustainable. If you are living in joy all the time, you're going to blow out your dopamine receptors. We're already doing that with, short-form media and stuff, but I sound like a boomer for some reason. I don't know. But the sukha, the comfort, the happiness that's there, that's like a flame, like a ghee flame, an oil flame, It's just still. And it remains steady. So that tranquility, that happiness, that ease of mind is much more sustainable. So it lasts from the first jhana to the second jhana to the third jhana. And it's mentioned in the suttas that this is what the noble ones call a pleasant abiding, which is to say that it is very pleasing to be in it. It is very pleasurable to be in the third jhana. But beyond the third jhana is the fourth. And what ceases in the fourth is the sukha as well. Now, people think that if the sukha ceases, then what's going on there? What happens in the fourth jhana? There is strong mindfulness and equanimity in the fourth jhana. In fact, it says the major factor of the fourth jhana is he or she has mindfulness due to equanimity. Why? Because as you're going through each of the jhanas, as I mentioned earlier, the jhanas are essentially the cessation of the hindrances and the activation and balancing of the enlightenment factors. And as you're balancing the enlightenment factors using right effort, using the 4 R's, using the 6 R's, if you're using that, what you're doing is the mindfulness goes into discernment. The discernment goes into energy. The energy goes into joy. The joy goes into tranquility. The tranquility goes into collectedness. So the mind is now collected. And the collectedness goes into equanimity. That equanimity goes back to mindfulness. It cycles back into mindfulness. And this time the mindfulness is deeper. And it cycles through the jhanas until in the fourth jhana, all there is this mindfulness. There's a deep sense of equanimity here. The mind is unwavering. It feels neutral. It says there, with the transcending of pain and pleasure. It goes beyond the duality of pain and pleasure, and it just remains in this neutral equanimity. It's not indifferent. The indifference is the shadow of equanimity. It's very important to understand this. They call it the near enemy, or the enemy of equanimity. Equanimity is seeing things as they are. Indifference is you see it, but you don't want to face it. And so there's a quality of aversion in that indifference. And you're kind of wanting to ignore it. Equanimity is facing everything. Painful, pleasurable, neutral, whatever it is, it just remains steady. Upekkha, that's the word for equanimity. Upeksha, right? It's different from apeksha. What does apeksha mean? Expectation. Uh-huh. So upekkha is free of any of that expectation. It's free of any of that craving, that clinging, that grasping. Just remains neutral to observe things as they are. Yata Bhuta Jnana Dasana. So in this fourth jhana, you will see that the mind is exceptionally clear and very few thoughts, if at all, are there in the background. And the mind is unwavering. The attention is unwavering. Even if that, even if that bird is chirping, the mind remains steady. It's aware of the bird chirping. It just passes right through. And it just remains relaxed in the object of meditation. There is a sutta called the Metta Sahagata Sutta. I believe it's Samyutta Nikaya 46.54. And in that sutta, it says that the limit of loving kindness is the fourth jhana, which is also known as the beautiful. Why is it called the beautiful? Because it is beautiful. It's an amazing space. Like I said, bliss is overrated. People go after bliss. They're basically low consciousness people who are going after bliss. Right? They don't realize that there's more beyond just the bliss. Once they transcend that bliss, then their consciousness is raised. Otherwise, they're just going after serotonin and dopamine, even if it's just mental. Eventually, once they transcend that bliss, they go into this neutral zone, a space where everything is equanimous. And that is the most sustainable place to be in. And that is where the limits of loving kindness reach. So these are the four jhanas. Beyond that, there are something called the ayatanas. Ayatana means dimension, or field, or space. There are four ayatanas: infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. So when you get to this space, the teacher will tell you, okay, I'm going to give you new instructions. I'm going to tell you to radiate in the 6 directions. Sometimes the teacher will do it without you having gotten to the 4th jhana, just because it feels like it's appropriate. Because the ayatanas are accessible even outside of the scope of the 4 jhanas. Even though they are within the vicinity of the 4th jhana, they can be accessible directly without having to traverse 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you are radiating loving kindness in this direction, in all 6 directions, what happens is the mind starts to become more collected. And you start to, it says, he transcends perceptions of diversity and transcends perception of form, because now we are entering into the formless territory. Perceptions of diversity means that the mind gets less and less interested in the sensual experiences, to the extent that the mind is just remaining in itself. There might be contact. A fly might land on your skin and you barely experience it. Somebody may be calling out to you and you barely hear what they're saying. Your mind is that collected. And as you're starting to radiate the loving kindness, your mind feels like it is expanding. You lose awareness of the body, which you begin to lose in the 3rd jhana. And by the 4th, you're just up in the head. By the time you're in infinite space, you're now feeling that expansion. You're feeling spacious. You feel like you're transcending the limits of this physical body. And that the boundaries between where the physical body ends and where the outside world begins starts to disappear. That's why when you encompass the loving kindness with everyone in it and then go beyond, you're starting to feel that expansion. This is infinite space. And tied to that infinite space is compassion. What is compassion? Karuna. Metta is essentially friendliness. Comes from Maitri. Maitri Bhav, which means the feeling of friendliness, benevolence, the goodwill towards another being, wanting their happiness, wishing for their happiness. Karuna, compassion, is not sympathy. It is not looking down at another person and feeling sorry for them. Compassion is empathy, or it includes empathy. The recognition of my own suffering helps me to recognize the suffering in other beings. This is compassion. And quite literally, holding space for another being is also compassion. That is an act of compassion. Actively listening to someone, lending them your ear. People just want to air out their grievances. They don't necessarily need anybody to give them an answer. They just need to be heard. They want to feel heard. They want to feel seen. The act of doing that for another person is compassion. Compassion doesn't mean that we are crutches for the person in pain. We do not take their pain away because we are not responsible for their pain. We hold space and give them the tools necessary so that they can apply it for themselves. This is best exemplified in a sutta. It's, I think, Majjhima Nikaya 107, in which somebody comes to the Buddha and asks him, why is it that some of your students attain Nibbana and some of your students don't attain Nibbana? And he gives a really good answer. He gives an interesting metaphor. He said, analogy. He says, suppose there were a man who was approached by a certain individual who said, good sir, give me the directions to get to Rajagaha. Rajagaha is now modern day Rajgir, where if you are going to Bodh Gaya, you might see it. That's where, on the way, you have, I think, King Bimbisar's palace, and you also have Vulture's Peak, and some really famous places that are mentioned in the sutta, the bamboo grove and so on. So show me the way to Rajagaha. How do I get to Rajagaha? And so the man gives him the instructions and tells him, you make a left here, if you go here, you make a right, and all that. So he says thank you, and he goes on his way. There's a second man who approaches that man. He says, what is the way to Rajagaha? He gives him the same set of instructions. He says, you go this way, this way, this way. He gives the same set of instructions. And the man says, thank you very much, and he goes on his way. The first man decides to take shortcuts and decides that he might know better and doesn't listen or follow the instructions of the man who gives the directions. He gets lost. There is no Rajagaha. The second man follows the instructions, follows the directions, goes exactly how the man explained to him, gets to Rajagaha. So then the Buddha asks the man who asked him that question, why is it that some people get enlightened and some people don't? Yet they follow the same instructions. He says to him, now, whose fault is it? Is it the man giving the instructions, or is it the person who doesn't follow the instructions? And so the Buddha says, in the same way, I give you the teaching. Out of compassion, I give you the teaching. But you must walk the path. I cannot walk the path for you. So out of compassion, when you do something for someone, do not be their crutch. Allow them the space to grow and learn and do things on their own. In the same way you would do with children, little children. When they're first walking, you will give them the space to see if they can get up and start walking. And other things, riding a bike and so on and so forth. This is compassion. In the meditation, this feeling of compassion is a more diffuse form of metta. Whereas metta felt like this warmth and this glow and this upliftedness, the compassion feels a bit more diffuse. It feels spacious. There is a lightness, a softness, a kind of like cotton candy feeling to the compassion. So beyond infinite space, there is something called infinite consciousness. It's a very interesting space to be in. So as you are radiating loving kindness, as you're radiating compassion, which is limited to infinite space, as you're radiating all of that, what will happen is that the awareness will take over that space, and now you have infinite awareness. This is the beginning of infinite consciousness. Eventually, the mind becomes so pristinely aware that it starts to see the breakdown of consciousness. What do I mean by that? It starts to see the limits of awareness and starts to see the arising and passing away of infinite consciousnesses. We have been told in other ways that consciousness is all pervading and so on and so forth. Let's not talk about that. What we're referring to is the sensory-based consciousness, which is dependent upon contact. So what you are seeing is the arising and passing away of contact. And it can happen in the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body. It can happen in the mind. How can it manifest? Sometimes you will see flickering in your mind's eye. It's like as if the lights are being turned on and off very fast. Or you might see spirals, or you might see different colors, or you might see different shapes. You might see waves of light. You might see dots of light like stars in front of you. You might see all these different things. Or when it comes to the ears, you might actually hear maybe the bird chirping, but it slows down. And it's like you're hearing click, 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 like that. Very fast. Or you might smell phantom smells. It's like as if there's somebody is burning incense. Or, you might hear divine sounds. Or you might feel electricity coursing through your body. You might feel goosebumps. You might feel all kinds of things coming in and out of the body. Or you might start to see gaps in your awareness of thoughts. This is all infinite consciousness. Because what we are saying here is when you are listening to my voice, in every moment there is one iota, one quanta of sound wave hitting the ear and being received by the ear. And there's a consciousness that arises based on that. But this is fluid. So millions of sound waves are transferring to your ear. And the mind interprets that as a fluid experience of listening. Same with the lights. Same with everything that you're seeing here. When you're on LSD or mushrooms or any other psychedelic, this can happen where things slow down and you start to see like things become jittery. Like there's, when you have a film reel and there's a gap in between one reel and the next. And it's like everything is like stuttering. This can happen. In my own experience, when I was meditating and doing my online retreat with David Johnson, I was having this experience of infinite consciousness. And I was living in San Diego at the time. And I came out of the meditation And I walked to the kitchen, and the people in the kitchen and everything around me was starting to come in and out of awareness. Like the people became like staccato, meaning they started like moving in very rigid ways, and I could just see frames, 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 not a fluid experience of whatever it was my eyes were taking in. This is infinite consciousness, which is what I'm saying. You can experience the jhanas and these states even outside of meditation. When your mind is doing walking meditation also, it can experience it. If your mind is deep enough, it will experience them. So tied to this infinite consciousness is something known as mudita, or empathetic joy. It means the joy of appreciation for the happiness of others, whereas compassion was the wish for all beings to be free of suffering because I know what suffering feels like. Empathetic joy is the recognition of others' happiness and being happy for them and celebrating in their happiness. This is why it is a wonderful antidote towards or for envy and jealousy, because you appreciate whatever successes the other person has and you feel warmth and happiness for them. And so the limits of this joy, right? So in other words, loving kindness can be experienced all the way to the fourth. Compassion can be experienced from the first all the way up to infinite space. Empathetic joy can be experienced from the first jhana all the way up to infinite consciousness. Now, I want to tell you something. It's not necessary for all of you to experience these states in succession or in order, or for you to experience them at all. Sometimes you may bypass or skip some of these experiences. This is just the entire map that I'm showing you, conveyed from the suttas. You don't need to walk the entire map. It's just allowing you to know where you might be on the map. And you might not end up in infinite consciousness. And you might just directly go into nothingness, and that's okay. We'll talk about what that is. But how does one get from infinite consciousness to nothingness? What happens is, eventually, all of that flickering, the sounds, all of that becomes tiresome. You're starting to see the arising and passing away of these infinite contact fields. And eventually you realize, oh, it's impermanent. Just arising and passing away, arising and passing away. And you get bored, you get tired, you're like, this is enough. And now you're a direct experience of suffering, dukkha. As a result of which you realize there's no controller here with the arising and passing away of consciousnesses. It is an impersonal process. And so now you are seeing not self, immediate recognition and experience of anatta. So the perception of impermanence leads to the perception of dukkha, or suffering. The perception of suffering leads to the perception of anatta, or not self. The perception of not self leads to yatta bhutta jnana dasanam, or equanimity, the perception of equanimity. And so what happens? You start to see those flickering start to have gaps, or those thoughts having larger and larger gaps in between them, or in the sounds, or anything else that's happening. There's gaps. And your mind starts to drop into those gaps. And as it drops into those gaps, it becomes more stabilized. And you now enter into what is known as nothingness. Why is it called nothingness? Because there is no thing. There's literally nothing there the mind is taking as an object, except for empathetic joy. And eventually that empathetic joy turns into equanimity. Another way of understanding nothingness is the mind becomes so withdrawn that it is no longer interested in what is happening outside. So no things external to the mind are visible, are perceivable. The mind is completely withdrawn inside. Sometimes when there is contact, for some time you might experience it, very, very distantly, whatever's happening outside, but now you're in nothingness. And tied to this is equanimity. What is equanimity? It is that even mindedness. It's the mind where it's just very tranquil and very neutral. I look at equanimity as this very still lake, right? I don't know if I told you guys when I went to Austria, we went down there and we saw this lake. That is what it is, that feeling of equanimity. Very clear, very balanced. And you're radiating that now, and then there's nothing going on. Eventually, as you're radiating that equanimity, now here's the question. How do you radiate loving kindness? You say, may beings be free of suffering, may they be happy, may they be filled with loving kindness, and so on. How do you radiate compassion? Again, may beings be free of suffering, may they be filled with compassion, may I have compassion for them. How do you have empathetic joy? May beings celebrate in their happiness, may I celebrate in their happiness. How do you bring up equanimity? May beings experience tranquility. May they experience calm. May they have equanimity. May I feel equanimous towards all beings. So this equanimity eventually, as you're radiating, starts to become quieter and quieter and quieter and subtler and subtler and subtler. And then it's like nothing is happening at all. Your mind is just very quiet. And you may decide you want to bring up the equanimity again. And as you do that, it's like just dropping a small pebble onto the surface of a lake, and it just ripples out this equanimity. And eventually the ripples start to die down again. It's very still and flat and clear. And then you might do it again, but this time the mind doesn't feel like it wants to do anything. And so now you're taking mind as the object. Mind itself becomes the object. It's like the mind has internalized and collapsed into itself, withdrawn completely into itself. And now it will enter into the territory of neither perception nor non-perception. So what is neither perception nor non-perception? What is perception? Perception is the ability to recognize what is arising in terms of an experience. The knowledge of something is rooted in learning, and that memory brings up a perception that this is the color red, this is the color blue, this is the color orange, and so on and so forth. Neither perception or non-perception means that at a certain point, certain formations, certain samskaras, certain images come up in the mind. And it's like you are in a hypnagogic state. It's like you are asleep but awake at the same time. And you're lucid. Patterns come up, distant memories come up, very cloudy images come up. It's not sloth and torpor, because the mind is clear. And it's like your mind is trying to make logical sense of what's happening, but it's just not able to, because the faculties of perception are starting to diminish and starting to quiet down. And so it's neither full perception, right, nor non-perception. You are aware of something there, but you can't fully make out what it is. And you might go through this for a period of time until all of that haze starts to settle down, and now you're just in clear space where the mind is very quiet. You may still hear things, you may still get contact from the outside world, but the mind is very quiet. And this object of the mind being very quiet can start from the first jhana all the way up to this 8th level, which is the neither perception nor non-perception. Eventually, the mind becomes so quiet that very small vibrations are perceivable. And all you have to do is just put a tinge of relaxation in there, and the vibration flattens out. The waves flatten out. This is where you may actually balance the mind with enlightenment factors. The mind if it has too much sloth and torpor, or has too much tranquility, you bring up some discernment, you bring up some energy, you bring up some joy, some curiosity, some collectedness. right? A little bit more focus. If the mind is having restlessness, too much going on, and it just feels um, like there's no way to control that, there's no way to get out of it, bring a little bit of tranquility. It's like you're micro dosing on tranquility or micro dosing on joy. Just a little is enough for the mind to experience it all in this space. Sometimes what happens is that might not be enough. The mind is just so caught up in everything. What will I do? Or what will I tell you to do? Go back a step. Go to equanimity and radiate equanimity again until the mind settles back into its self, into quiet mind. And again, the same thing happens. So what do? You try using all of these different enlightenment factors based on what is required. Or if it's too much, you go back again and you radiate equanimity. Sometimes you might have to go a couple of steps below that and go to loving kindness or compassion and radiate that. And eventually it goes back into quiet mind. And you may have to loop back again and again a few times. And guess what happens? Disenchantment comes up. You've had enough of this cycling through equanimity and coming to quiet mind, equanimity, and then coming back to quiet mind. Your mind is like, you know what? I don't care anymore. If thoughts come up, distractions come up, it's fine. I'm going to remain in the background and stay here. I'm going to remain steady. I don't care what comes up. I'm just going to see whatever happens and don't do anything. Eventually, all of these different things come up and arise and pass away, and they're just passing through your mind, and your mind becomes like Teflon, like nonstick. This is the dispassion. And now your mind dips into what's known as micro cessations. You come in and out of consciousness. It feels like you're fainting into something. So when this happens, do not fear, do not get scared. It is a normal process of the practice. The mind may feel like I'm going to die, like I'm sinking into something. It starts to pay attention to its breathing. It's like, am I breathing? What's going on? And for that, all you have to do is bring some equanimity and say, whatever happens, it's going to be fine. It's all right. Just keep letting the mind sink into it. Sometimes you may go into what's known as the signless, the objectless collectedness of mind, where there's just pure awareness, not taking anything as an object. The analogy here is like a flashlight that you point to the sky and the light just goes up into space without landing on any celestial object and keeps going. The same way is with your awareness. You just are aware, but not aware of anything in particular. And in that mindset or in that space, in the seeing of something arising, the very seeing of it, it relaxes whatever distraction might come up or whatever proto-thought might come up. Eventually, because your attention is so stilled and you're not paying attention to anything in particular, because no stimulus is arising and you're able to stay here without any expectation. When you least expect it, this is what I say, I hammer it to you guys all the time. When you least expect it, nirvana happens. When you least expect it. Meaning you are not in the waiting room of nirvana. You're not waiting for nirvana to come up. You're just content. Dispassion and disenchantment, contentment is the key. I'm okay with this. If I have to stay in this space for 20 minutes, if I have to stay in this space for 1 hour, if I have to be here for 30 hours, please don't do that. Just giving a very extreme example. But the idea is that I don't care what happens anymore. I'm just going to be here and content with this space. When you least expect it, the mind drops. It's like as if the mind goes unconscious, completely unconscious. And it drops into the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And then what comes up after that is just for a brief moment, the mind touches the Nibbana element. It touches the substrate of all reality, which is the Nibbana element. And then because of that, there is something known as the contact that is unconditioned. This contact is known to be undirected, signless, undirected, and empty. It's signless because there's no object there at all. It has touched something that is beyond the scope of our consensus reality. It is outside of the purview of conditioned reality, of time and space. And it is undirected because no intention can take you there. Because any intention that's there means there is expectation. And expectation is dukkha in construction, under construction, as Venerable Metananda would say. And it is empty because there's no self that the mind attaches it to. It's just an impersonal process. And when the mind comes out of it, it experiences immense relief and immense joy like you've never felt before. If anybody has done MDMA here, you know what that joy feels like, but it is 10 times better than that. Just like a fountain of continuous joy that comes up. And the mind is so free of it, so completely relaxed and in relief. It's like all of this weight that was on your shoulders have been lifted and you just feel content. You feel like you want to be in seclusion. And then you walk around, it's like you're floating, you know? Everything is just like you're on cloud nine. Everything is perfect. And sometimes this cessation is not discernible. Sometimes you're not aware that there was a gap in your awareness, but you do realize that there was this immense joy that came up, this immense relief that came up. And then when you look outside in the world around you, you see like the grass is somehow sharper in terms of its greens. The reds are much redder, the yellows are more yellow, and so on and so forth. There's like hyper clarity in your senses. So what do you do after that? Rinse and repeat. Go back and sit. Of course, it's going to be difficult for you to sit. You might not be able to sleep even because of the immense energy and joy and relief that's there for some time. But then you come out of it and then your mind is like, okay, there's still craving, there's still aversion, there's still identification. That's okay. You experienced a preview into full awakening by touching the Nibbana element. Now, you rinse and repeat. Whenever your mind is ready to go back to meditate, you sit down and you meditate. And you go through that process again. This process of the jhanas, again, as I said, it doesn't have to be in sequence. If you don't experience all the stuff I'm telling you, it's okay. I'm just giving you the entire field map. That's it. How you decide or how the mind decides to go in that journey is up to it. What it decides to experience and not experience is up to it. Yesterday we went through transcendental dependent origination or dependent liberation. This is being experienced as you traverse through the jhanas as well and through the ayatanas. And so this is why in the West now, I wouldn't say this is the exact reason, but this is probably one of the reasons why in the West there is so much emphasis on jhanas. Just like 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was this whole hullabaloo about mindfulness, right? You know, mindfulness-based this, mindfully eating, mindfulness-based apps, and all of that. All great stuff. But it's now gotten into the territory of the mech mindfulness, right? And now we're getting into the territory of mech jhanas, sadly. It's nice that people are getting introduced to this, but you have to understand these are stepping stones towards full awakening. They themselves are not that important. They are the markers, the mile markers that let you know, okay, you've reached this much on your path to nibbana, on your destination, towards your destination. So don't worry about whether you're in jhana or not in jhana, where you've experienced it, whether you're progressing. I wonder if I'm in this jhana or that jhana. Doesn't matter. What matters is how much fun you're having along the way. Do not make it like homework. Do not make it like some kind of assignment that you have to do. Remember, go back to the inner child. Be happy. Make it a game. Make it fun. And the more you do that, the easier your mind slips into these states. And the easier it is for you to just let go, let go, let go, let go, until you get to these levels of cessation and cease experiences and further experiences and further experiences until there's a total cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And when you come out of it, it is unlike anything you may have ever experienced in your life. And it is so profound because the insights that arise based on that, the experiential insights into the links of dependent origination, which we'll go over tomorrow, makes you realize in reality, in real time, the impersonal nature of this world. And you begin to understand the truth of this existence and this samsara, because you've touched the substrate that makes up this samsara. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Two questions. First, the equanimity of force jhana and equanimity in nothingness, are they same or is there any subtle difference in
No,
both?
they are the same.
Okay. Second question, some people have the tendencies, right? Like their general way of existence is, say, you know, they genuinely have that empathetic joy. They genuinely celebrate, achievements of their friends, family, so on. And they have other Brahma Viharas, as well as, I would say, having a general sense of ease in existence and in contentment. Like they go up and down, right? But the default state, so to speak, has become of that. How do you interpret that in terms of jhanas?
You see, the thing is, such people may experience jhanic states without realizing that they're falling into jhanic states.
Okay.
Or they're just experiencing those emotions of empathetic joy without it being followed by a collectedness, because jhana means the mind needs to be collected.
So it's not there is overlap in the texture of feeling, but it may not be a jhanic state.
That's right.
Is it possible to experience cessation outside jhanas?
Yes. Sometimes what will happen is, and there have been examples of this, where people are having a very deep realization, deep experience, very collected, and they might be walking to the dining hall, and then for a moment their mind just becomes very blank, and when they come out, they feel just surge of energy and joy and relief. Sometimes what can happen is, uh, like if I might be reading a sutta that's like a guided meditation, or I might be giving a guided meditation, people's minds become so deeply engrossed in what is being said because it's so measured and detailed that their mind is entrained into a very collected state, that for a few moments their mind just drops and experiences cessation as well. So it's quite possible.
One more question. Uh, where does self-inquiry fit in all this? Or it's done nothing to do with the jhanas?
No, it can lead to nothingness. Like when you find out who am I, and you try to see where is the self, eventually the mind kind of just drops everything and it comes to nothingness. And the quality of mind is generally equanimous. So it can lead to that.
Is there any work required, self-inquiry work in the jhanas?
In the jhanas themselves,
Yeah.
That's where the experience of samatha and vipassana are kind of conjoined, where you're seeing for yourself this impersonal process through infinite consciousness. But some people, what they'll do is they'll go into samatha, which is they'll just go in a jhanic state, come out and reflect on the self, and then experience, the dissolution of self.
There are some people, it's a sort of a follow up question on what Divya asked. There are some people who just feel things too much. Some people who have borderline personalities, for example, they are just naturally attuned to emotions. So, isn't it more difficult for them to experience cessation, detachment, disenchantment than other people?
Not necessarily. There's nothing about it being more difficult or easier or anything like that. It's just if you're going to follow the instructions, um, it may take a little bit more time. And some people surprise themselves. It's like because they're just following the instructions and going through the process, because there's no expectation of what is to happen, they just fall into the experience. So I would say that, it is based on a person's inclinations and faculties. It's just dependent upon how immersed they are in the experience or how unimmersed or how kind of dispersed their attention is.
With the support of any metaphor or analogy, can you give me a description of the feeling you felt when you snapped back from nothingness?
From nothingness.
From nothingness. Like that feeling you said, like you feel immeasurable joy.
Yeah.
So, like that feeling, can you give a metaphor or like an analogy which will give me some idea, some context as to how it feels?
Yeah, like I was talking about, if you've done MDMA,
Yeah,
you feel this surge of serotonin.
yeah, yeah.
That's how you're feeling it. And the relief that you feel, like I said, is like, you've been carrying this weight on your shoulders, and like all of that just drops, and you feel like you're floating, like you just have become free of all burdens.
So when one is starting out and the body is not stable, say there is pain, sickness, or whatever in everyday life, and you don't have enough equanimity, right? How does one meditate? Does it change to like just compassion? Because you might have some expectation. Okay, I've been meditating in a certain way, but today, I have pain, and yeah. So do you change the quality to compassion, acceptance instead of being in whatever other state you would be otherwise?
Can I just point out that your shirt says Nirvana?
Yeah.
We're all after her.
Yeah, this t-shirt is on sale.
um, yeah, I think it's still possible when you're feeling pain or sickness for your mind to go into a jhanic state. Like, for example, we have the Buddha as a very prime example. He was suffering from severe back pain all his life, or at least towards his older period of life. And so he would actually use jhana as a way of relieving the pain. But of course, his mind was already trained in that process. Not to say it's not possible. Another thing is to use the enlightenment factors as a way of inculcating or cultivating these jhanic states. There's examples of this as well. Very interesting. Like Mahamoglana, one of the chief disciples of the Buddha, was very sick. And so the Buddha guided him through the enlightenment factors. And it's said that he felt much better. Like it's like he came out of his sickness, whatever it was. I wouldn't read too much into it by saying that it's going to heal you, but it allows your mind to kind of go away from or divert the attention from the pain and more towards the internal states of joy and equanimity. The funny thing about that is later on, the Buddha gets sick, and Mahamoglana gives him a sermon on the enlightenment factors. and that takes him out of his sickness. So it's very much possible.
Yeah. So for a layperson, like
Yeah,
for in
again, for a
everyday life.
layperson also, if they just focus on, let's say, the breath, or just focus on compassion or loving kindness, eventually their mind will become collected enough. Wherever you're sitting, you become like less in contact with the body, you become more internalized. But it just requires time and the right amount of effort to get there.
So you probably are not even sitting in that state.
You
Maybe
could
you're
be
lying down.
on your deathbed, you could be just in bed doing that, and that's fine. You could be lying down, and that's fine.
So I'm still not convinced. I think, say I'm feeling pain today right now, and I want to sit and meditate. Like how would I? And I'm a very beginner, so how would I
Take a painkiller. Yeah, please. I mean, you have your own.
Yeah, so I have backache, like really bad backache. I have a lumbar support belt right now. What I do is either I use the chair or I meditate lying down. So, your spine is straight, at least in my case, and the pain is lessened. Second is you can go for a walking meditation. So, the restlessness from the pain that gets released to an extent. Third, what Delson instructed me was to use the pain sort of as an object of meditation, not get too focused on it, but just to see it impartially and see the impermanence of it, and then it sort of dissipates. Yeah, no, no. You are just then, the object and the way you approach the meditation sort of shifts. You uh, just, in that moment, the object is to, reduce the hindrance. You don't have to always go with the meta or, compassion or anything. Yeah, I hope that helps.
I would say that at some point you will experience joy. It might just take longer period of time. Any other questions?
When we experience the cessation of consciousness, feeling, and what's the other one?
Perception.
Perception. That doesn't necessarily mean we're about to become a stream enter.
Right. That's right.
So it might take a few attempts until we
Yeah, you might
see.
just be dipping your toes in, not necessarily fully going into the lake, let's say.
So what's then really required?
See, this is the thing. What I'm telling you guys is just standard model that the twin people talk about. I told you in the beginning, like I don't want to talk about enlightenment states or stages of awakening because nobody has it right. Everybody has their own theory, everybody has their own model about it. And the twin model is if you had experienced cessation the first time, there's a high likelihood when you experience the joy and relief that you have entered the stream. But there are evidences in the suttas to suggest that one can enter the stream without cessation. One can even experience arahatship without cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. In other words, that state of cessation. Because again, cessation is used in so many different contexts. When we're talking about dukkha nirodha, the cessation of suffering, it means you're just free of suffering in that moment, or free of suffering in that period of time. What it is when it comes to stream entry is there are a few things that the Buddha mentions as factors of stream entry, or let's say signs of stream entry. Primarily, he says, actually, the evidence is in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where Ananda is asking the Buddha, once you're gone, how are we to discern where someone is? How do we know somebody has become a stream enter or stream winner? And the Buddha says there's something known as the mirror of the Dhamma. That mirrors basically to what extent someone has experiential confidence in the triple gem. In other words, complete confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and keeps the precepts. That's also in other suttas that talks about it. So total experiential confidence plus keeping the precepts and a, and a process of when a precept is broken, immediately recovering from that and realizing, oh, I broke a precept, I will choose not to do that again and keep the precept. When it gets to other stages after that, it's using the 10 fetter model. So the first 3 fetters are gone for a stream enterer, so you have to see in your mind if that's the case. The next 2 are weakened for the once returner, and then the first 5 are gone for the non-returner, and all 10 are gone for the fully awakened being. That's really the parameters that are used in order to assess this. The reason I stay away from all of that now is because not only from my experience, but also from the experience of others, it's like with the twin practice, there is a lot of emphasis on cessation, a lot of emphasis on like KPIs, very frankly speaking. Like, how many cessations can I get as a teacher from students? And it's like, if I can just get this person to get cessation, now I'm top teacher. That's really what it is. So for the student, for the practitioner, it's an understanding of how quickly can I let go of my negative emotions and recover from them? And to what extent do I have experiential confidence, which means to what extent do I feel inclined for practice and to follow the path? Sariputta also gives an example of stream entry where he says one who enters the path of the Eightfold Path is already one who enters the stream. But one who completes that path in one cycle, one who experiences the process of the Eightfolds and comes to that right view of the Four Noble Truths, is one who wins the stream winner, stream enterer with fruition, let's say.
Thank you.
You mentioned about micro cessations. I just want to ask how that feels like.
It's like for a moment your mind just went unconscious and you come up and there's brightness in the mind.
Okay.
Okay, let's share some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.